Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us today at our second webinar for this fall for our Masters in Finance program, focusing on admissions. My name is Chris Papalologu and I'm the Recruitment Manager for the Masters in Finance and MBA programs. And I'm here today with Peter Johnson, our Senior Admissions Manager, that will be presenting these admissions presentations, giving you a lot of insights about our program.
Okay, thanks very much, Krista. So as Krista says, I'm Peter Johnson. I'm the Senior Admissions Manager for the program. Basically what that means is that Krista and her team will be your primary point of contact up to the point in which you applied for the program. And then once you've applied, then me and my team will work with you all the way through the admissions process. So what we're covering this afternoon is we've got a presentation about 30 to 40 minutes where I'm going to talk about the different elements of the application. I'm going to explain the application process to you, and along the way I'm going to try and give you some useful tips for your application. There's plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so you can type your questions in all the way through my presentation, and I'll try and answer all of them at the end. So I wanted to start off just by putting the Masters in Finance in the context of the portfolio Masters degrees we offer here at London Business School. And you can broadly put those into three buckets. The first ones being the early career programs, which are our Masters in Management, our Global Masters in Management, and our Masters in Financial Analysis. And those are really geared towards new graduates, so typically 0 to 1 years of experience. Then we have what we call our mid-career programs or our post-experience programs. Our MBA is obviously the biggest of those. The Masters in Finance, the program I'm looking at today, shares many features with our MBA. So similar kind of requirement for work experience and similar range of work experience. The significant difference between the MIF and the MBA is the MIF is very much geared towards people with existing finance experience, who are very focused on a finance career. And then completing the portfolio, we have our leadership programs, our Sloan Masters in Leadership and Strategy, and then the entire range of MBA programs we offer, both in London, in Dubai, and with our partner schools in Asia and the US. So one of the first things that you'll do when you're starting to consider business school programs is to research the various schools and programs in order to find what's the best fit for you. And you're obviously doing that right now, so that's great, because good research is absolutely key. The decision on what school and program you'll ultimately apply to is a very personal one. And therefore each of you will consider many different elements along the way and give different weighting to each of those elements. But in general, there are several common criteria which applicants use to narrow their search when they're choosing the right school and the right program. And these will be things like the reputation of the school, the brand stays with you for life, not just while you're on campus or you're looking for your first employment opportunity. And I'm very proud to say that the Masters in Finance is ranked #1 by the Financial Times and has been consistently since that ranking was launched in 2011. So certainly reputation is important, But I think equally important is looking at the group of students that you'll be studying alongside, as they're a very important element in your learning, particularly given that any good program will be highly collaborative, and you'll learn a lot from your peer group. But that peer group also becomes part of your lifelong network, and they're going to be people who you spend a significant amount of time with outside the classroom. So do have a look on our website at the profiles of the class. We'll be posting up the directory of the most recent intake in the next week or so. And that really gives you a flavour of the nationality range and the kind of professional experience that we're recruiting for the Masters in Finance. The location of the school is important. Really asking yourself, do you want to be located in a major business hub like London, with all that means in terms of access to recruiters, the type of speakers we have on campus? Or are you more attracted to a quieter setting like a rural campus environment? Consider the student life on the campus, what kind of activities there are, what kind of clubs, conferences, the range of speakers that you can expect to interact with. And all of that, this information is really very clear on our website, also if you're following social media, etc. The level of resource that the school puts into its career services should be a really important consideration. And that's something we pride ourselves in very much. And I would say certainly look at the employment data to see what kind of range of salaries we're achieving on graduation, and what's the success rate in terms of people finding employment within 3 months of graduation. Then look a bit at the programme structure. And I think within that, what you want to see is a good range of core courses, a good range of electives. But within that, you should be looking for a high degree of flexibility. And within the Masters in Finance, we have flexibility on the full-time programme in terms of exit points. You can either choose a 10 or a 16-month period for your study. And we have this, the major alternatives of being able to study full or part-time. Full-time obviously is a much more immersive experience. Part-time allows you to study while you're still earning. So part-time will be very much geared towards people who are working in London or in the major financial centres in Western Europe. Also check the global opportunities that are on offer. And again, this is something I think we really excel at. All business is global, and that's very much the case with finance. So we really believe that future leaders require international experience and should desire to work in a global context with real confidence. And finally, of course, you'll consider the cost of the degree. And when you're doing that, consider all the different financial aid options that are available. We have a couple of really great loan programs. We also have a quite limited range of scholarships, but we certainly do have scholarships. And you should also be researching grants and loans and scholarships in your own country. Just to give you a flavour of what the programme looks like in terms of people taking part, this is the class that started in mid-August this year. So 126 students. We'll be aiming for around 120 again for the 2018 intake. 27% women, something that we are really eager to increase. The average age is 29. There are 36 nationalities represented, and that's a very broad spread internationally. And we try to achieve a situation where no one nationality is more than 10% of the class. So you really do get that international exposure. Around 93% of the students will come from outside the UK. And in this intake, there was 5 years of work experience. Just to give you a sense of the work experience requirement, we'd be expecting the vast majority of the class to be in the roughly 3 to 7 year experience range, because that's really where recruiters are coming to us seeking to hire. We will consider people with just 2 years experience, but that really needs to have been a kind of fast track 2 years. And you need to be able to make a very good case why you wouldn't wait till 3 years before starting the programme. If you're company sponsored, we're much more comfortable with you being above 7 years of experience, given that you will be returning to your employer on graduation. But we would always encourage you to, if you're seriously considering the programme, we would always encourage you to submit your CV for review before you proceed, just so we can give you some feedback. We know a lot more about you then, and we can really start a much more in-depth dialogue that way. So going on to the part-time, one thing I should say is that the full-time class on the core course, so for most of the first term, is split into two streams. So you would normally be around 60 people in the classroom. We don't teach all 126 in one go. Going on to the part-time programme, this year we admitted 64 students. We'll be aiming for around 70 for the 2018 intake. As you can see, again, we've still got some way to go on the proportion of women in the class. The part-time class is slightly older with slightly more work experience. So, kind of on average, somewhat more senior than the full-time programme. And that seems to work very well. Still very international, so 27 nationalities and 87% coming from outside the UK. So I'm just going to now talk a bit about the admissions requirements, the kind of people who make a good fit for the programme. So firstly, and this won't surprise you at all, I'm sure, is we're looking for a high level of academic ability. And we will judge that by looking at the transcripts for your previous university studies. We'll look at the intellectual challenge of your job. And we use GMAT or GRE, both are standardised tests, as part of our decision-making process. And we've already got a couple of questions about GMAT. So I'll talk a bit more about that in the Q&A. We're looking for international exposure. Now by that we don't mean that you necessarily have worked outside your native country. But what we do look for is a kind of global mindset, that you're aware of international issues within finance and in the wider kind of political context. Given that the way we're teaching is very international in its emphasis, having that kind of awareness is really key to getting the most out of the programme. We're looking for strong team skills and the ability to contribute inside and outside the classroom. As I already said, the programme is highly collaborative. There's a lot of use of case studies, and we're expecting you to share your professional experience in the classroom, in your study group, in the social activities, the clubs you take part in, etc. And I'll come back to that point a couple of times later on. We're looking for a high degree of self-awareness, and I think in preparation for applying, it's really important to spend a considerable amount of time thinking about what your aspirations are, not just in the sort of 2 to 5 year time frame, but across the rest of your career and indeed the rest of your life. And think about what are your strengths and what are your challenges. Spend plenty of time talking with your friends, your family, your colleagues. Great time to call on a mentor if you have a mentor at work, and really test out the case that you're making to yourself about why London Business School and why the Masters in Finance. And I think the more time you spend in that self-reflection, the better prepared you will be to write the application essays, and assuming we call you for interview, you'll have a much better, much more rehearsed performance at interview if you've done this research and this reflection really thoroughly. We're looking for a high level of commitment and motivation. This is a very intensive programme, whether you're studying full or part-time. It's very, very rigorous. So you really need that level of commitment and motivation to carry you through. And you need a high degree of resilience, given that how tough and challenging it is. That being said, we're very good at judging that, and that's one of the key elements of the application process. And we normally achieve 100% graduation for each cohort. And as I've already said, we very much expect you to be a contributor both inside and outside the classroom. So in terms of what you should be doing now, I think, well, you're already taking part in this webinar, which is great. And there are a series of other things you can do to get to know us better. Obviously, look up our website. That's very, very detailed in terms of explaining a lot of things that I can't cover today. If you have the option to, if you're in London, if you're London-based or visiting London, get in touch with us, come and visit campus. Talk to our student ambassadors. They're great for insight into the nature of the programme, what the classroom experience is really like. Sign up to the London Business School Review. That's our major academic collection of papers. Goes out 3 times a year. And that's a really great way to get a sense of the school as a research institution and all our thought leadership. We use a huge range of social media, and given that we've got your contact details, we'll be reaching out to you via various channels with different types of information throughout the year. And finally, try and attend an event, as I said, either in London, if you're London-based, but we have an extensive range of international information events. We do coffee chats in major cities, so do go and check that on our website. So in terms of the application requirements, these are really relatively straightforward, and everything can be done online. So there's an online application form which asks you a series of kind of data points about you, your education, your career, etc. We ask for 2 references. I'll go into that in more detail in a moment. We have 2 essay questions. Again, I'll cover that in more detail shortly. We ask for either GMAT or GRE, whichever you take is really up to you. We're not fussed. And we ask for your CV. So looking into some of these elements, as part of the online application form, we ask you to upload your transcripts for your previous university studies. And we need to see grades, not just certificates. So we're looking for your results along the way. And I would say within that, if your grades are less than stellar, this does not rule you out, but be open and honest about any extenuating circumstances. You may, for example, have needed to work full-time all the way through undergraduate. You may have been very active in sport or student politics, something like that. And we're completely comfortable with that. There is a specific point in the application form where we ask you to let us know if there's a good reason why your grades aren't really a reflection of your true abilities. We ask for information about your professional qualifications. Things like CFA will definitely add value to your application. And a final point on grades is always remember that you can't change your grades, but you can submit a strong GMAT score or a strong GRE score. So if your grades aren't that strong, then you should certainly be planning to sit GMAT or GRE, because a good score there can very, very definitely offset a weaker performance in previous studies. For GMAT and GRE, I'll just say a little bit about that, because I think that holds quite a lot of terror for people who haven't already sat it. And I would say start looking into GMAT, GRE as soon as possible to get a sense of what's involved in it, how much preparation time you're going to allow. I think in terms of preparing for it, the longer you allow for it, just naturally you're going to get a higher score. And try and allow yourself enough time so that if your first sitting doesn't go well, you've got plenty of time to resit it, because we will always take your highest score. We don't average scores along the way. We're perfectly happy if you apply in advance of GMAT, GRE. We may ultimately waive the test requirement, or we may make you an offer conditional on a test score. And if we do that, we'll give you a reasonable amount of time to meet that requirement. The earlier in the application cycle you apply, the longer we can give you to sit GMAT. So that's a strong argument for early application. And we are, of course, still relatively early in the application cycle for this year. In terms of what a good score is, we'll be aiming for a class average of around 690, 700 for GMAT. If your score falls below 600, I would strongly encourage you to resit, because that would be a significant weakness in your application. Between 600 and 640 GMAT, it's in a sense a neutral factor. Perfectly fine, providing there are other significant strengths in your application. From 650 to 700, the GMAT is starting to be a significant positive factor in your application. And 700 plus, that becomes even more so. It becomes a very strong additional piece of information about you. That being said, a weaker GMAT score by no means rules you out, and a stronger GMAT score doesn't guarantee you admission to the programme. A little bit earlier on, I talked a bit about submitting your CV for review. And if you do that, we would standardly, if we give you positive feedback on your CV, we'll start a dialogue with you about the likelihood or not of GMAT waiver. So submitting your CV for review really makes an awful lot of sense. And finally, in the entry requirements, we ask you for a one-page CV, and we have quite a strict page limit on that, so 1 page. On our website, you can download a template and a series of notes for preparing your CV. And what we're really encouraging you there is to produce something that's very much about your professional achievements, about your progression, about your leadership qualities. And I would really encourage you to download that CV template. We can always improve the appearance of our CVs. And a well-presented CV can add significantly to your application. I also think that just reviewing your CV is a good exercise in thinking back about what you've achieved and what your challenges are, just as part of the whole application process. So in terms of the application process, once your application is complete, and that will include all the elements, I've just referred to, but not necessarily your GMAT or GRE. So once we've got everything else, quite soon after your application is complete, we'll make a decision on whether to call you for interview. And then shortly after your interview has taken place, we'll get a report back from your interviewer. The admissions committee then looks at the whole of your application again, including the feedback from the interviewer, and then we make our final decision. Now, from beginning to end, that can be anywhere, typically around 8 to 10 weeks, but quite often will be much faster than that if everything just falls into place really quickly. And certainly later in the application cycle, we'll be able to perform much quicker than that kind of 8 to 10 week timeline. So in terms of the application deadlines for this intake, you can see them on the slide here. We have 5 rounds for the full-time programme. Round 1's already closed. Round 2 is the next deadline, the 7th of November. And we go all the way up to the 2nd of May. Now, we try as far as possible to ensure that the selection criteria are the same in every round. But I think in reality, in rounds 4 and 5, competition does tend to get more severe as places are becoming much, much more limited. You don't have to wait till an application deadline to apply. And in fact, we start to review applications the minute we've closed one round. So if you missed the 7 November deadline by a few days, you wouldn't be waiting until January to get feedback from us. In the second and third columns, I've just given you some indicative dates, just to say, so if you completed by 7th November, you could expect our final decision by mid-January. So looking at the same thing for the part-time programme, exactly the same things apply, a number of rounds. We just have rather more rounds on the part-time, and we do accept applications up to the middle of June. Given that people are typically not relocating, we can afford to accept applications a bit later on in the part-time programme. So, going on to look at the essays. The essays are really one of the most important parts of the application. So do give yourself enough time for this. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, spend time thinking about what your work and life goals are. Talk to your friends, colleagues, family. Test your case out with a business mentor, for example. And I think the more time you spend thinking about this, really you need to make the case to yourself before you can make a convincing case to anybody else. And I think the more time you spend on that, the easier you'll find it to actually prepare the essays. In a bit of general guidance here, be precise, be concise. Each of the essays has a word limit, and that's really to encourage you to focus your thoughts very tightly. And remember that your interviewer will have your essays in front of them, and very often interviewers use your essays as the kicking off point for a lot of the dialogue in the interview. So the more comfortable you are with your essay answers, the better. Going on to look at the actual essays, I'm just going to flush these up quite quickly, but really just to stress that they're really very focused in terms of the questions they're asking. The first question is very much about your career objectives. So it's the ways in which potentially you benefit from the programme. And the second question is very much about what you contribute. So what do you give back? How will you be involved in assisting the learning of the people around you in your programme, in your study group, and what excites you about the wider school community? Make sure you're aware of the kind of clubs we have here. That's in the question the interviewer is almost certain to ask you. Have a sense of the kind of speakers we have on campus and a sense of the kind of conferences that our students organise. For the part-time programme, the first question is worded slightly differently because people's aspirations on the part-time programme may not be purely about a career shift. People might be perfectly happy in their current job, but looking to expand their skill set, for example. So in the first question, again, we're getting you to focus on how you benefit from the programme. And the second one, in terms of what you contribute, is identical with the full-time programme. And a couple of points on referees, because we get asked a lot of questions about these. We ask for 2 references. When you are completing your online application, you complete a section where you give your referee details. Our system then fires off an email with a link to the reference questions, and your referees submit online. I think a common mistake people will make is to become fixated by the seniority of their referee. Now, if it is somebody senior, that's cool, but there's no point in asking somebody to be a referee for you if they really don't know you well, they don't know you in a work context on pretty much a day-to-day basis. We much prefer to have 2 work references. I would say only give an academic reference if a previous professor has been really regularly in contact with you as your career's developed, so they're very well aware of you now. If they're just talking about your performance as a student, doesn't really add a lot of additional information because we already know that by referring back to your transcripts. So as I say, choose wisely. The relationship you have with your referee is much more important than their relative status or seniority. Spend time talking to your referee to explain your motivations. It really helps them to complete the reference if they're clear what your aspirations and goals are. And I think, using your referees as one of the reference points when you're considering the application, submitting an application, makes an awful lot of sense. Also give your referees ample time to prepare and submit the reference. When I talked earlier about the round deadlines, those are also the deadline for people to submit their references. And remember, your referees are likely to be busy people, so give them plenty of time so that your application doesn't just become delayed because they're busy. We don't require you to give your current line manager as a referee. If you're comfortable with doing that, that makes an awful lot of sense. But a lot of people won't want to disclose to their employer that they're applying to business school, and that's fine with us. We really just want 2 references from people who know you in a work context. So that could be a previous employer, it could be a colleague, it could be a customer or a client. So quite a wide range of choice there. In terms of the interview process, now once your application is complete, it's reviewed by me and my colleagues in the admissions team. And if we think you're a good fit for the programme, potentially, we'll then proceed to the interview stage. Our interviews are conducted by alumni of the Masters in Finance programme, and that works extremely well for us. Obviously, they've been through the experience themselves, so they have a good sense of what makes a good and a successful student on the Masters in Finance. And they can give you a lot of personal feedback about their experience of the programme. And of course, they're massively committed to maintaining the quality of the class and the levels of selectivity that we apply to the programme. We can arrange for you to be interviewed in pretty much every major financial centre internationally. And as far as possible, we'll try and match you with somebody who's in the same finance sector as you are, or in the finance sector that you aspire to go into after the programme. A couple of general points about interviews, and these are, I think, really obvious, but I'll make them anyway, is be on time. It's really bad turning up late for interviews. I'm sure you all know that. And I would say dress as you would for a job interview. But you can always check with your interviewer what they'll be comfortable. Say if you were meeting at a weekend in a cafe or something like that, they might be intending to dress much more casually and be perfectly happy if you do too. Before you go for the interview, there's no technical preparation you need to do. Do expect that the interviewer will ask you maybe quite technical questions about your job, but given that it is your job, you should be very comfortable answering those. I'd say also research your interviewer, look them up on LinkedIn, for example, get a sense of where they work, a bit about their background, their personal journey. Come along with plenty of questions prepared. The interview is normally much more of a dialogue than a really pressured job interview. And it's a great opportunity to find out a lot more about the student experience. And finally, really just as a common courtesy, always remember to send your interviewer an email afterwards thanking them. After the interview, be ready to make a very quick decision if we make you an offer. We'll give you a reasonable time frame. We'll typically make a final decision within a week to 2 weeks of your interview taking place. And we will give you around a month normally to make a decision on the offer. That will become shorter the closer we get to the start of the programme. So really have done your thoughts so that if you get an offer, you've already decided, what's important to you, what kind of questions you might want to ask of us. And have all the logistics in place. You should already have thought about your funding by the time you're applying. If you're leaving your current employer, you need to think about things like what is your exit strategy for that. And make good use of the LBS network. The minute we make an offer, we'll give you a lot more information, we'll give you a lot of additional access to the LBS network, and really maximise that contact. And finally, aim to be ready to apply as early as possible, but don't apply until you're ready. Make sure that you've got everything in place. But as I've said several times, the earlier you apply, the longer we can potentially give you to sit GMAT, the more time you've got to arrange the logistics. We need to take everything into account when we're considering your application. So our decision making is very balanced, it's very holistic. But I think broadly I can say the admissions committee, what we're looking for on the admissions committee is, do you benefit from the programme? Is it a good fit for your career goals and your life goals? We're asking ourselves, do you contribute? Will you really be able to contribute to the learning of others and to the community here at London Business School? We're looking at your intellectual ability and your intellectual curiosity. And we're looking at your commitment and your motivation. We really want people who have a passion to succeed. So I said 30 to 40 minutes, and I've run over by a couple of minutes. But now it's time for questions. And I can see from CRISPR that we've got quite a few already, which is great. But you can carry on typing them now, and we'll take as many as we can in the end. And just to remind you, this is me and CRISPR, so you know who's talking.
So thank you very much, PJ, for that. That was very useful. What I would say, I'll give PJ a couple of minutes to drink some water.
Thank you.
So you can take a breath. So what I would say as next steps, make sure you contact the recruitment team, submit your CV for review if you haven't done already, and come to one of our campus events and meet us in person. I think that's very important. If you're located in London, that should be very easy for you, and most of our information sessions are in the evening after work. But even if you are not around London or you cannot travel in London, you can always come along to our webinars and sign up for our next webinar, which is on the 2nd of November, and it's going to be focused on the program office and the program content. So,
great. I have had water now. Thank you.
Great. Our first question is on the GMAT waivers, and whether or not we do give out GMAT waivers, and if you can actually elaborate a bit.
Yeah. I think, as I said, yes, we certainly give a number of waivers for GMAT. What we're really looking for there, the scenario where we'd be likely to give a GMAT waiver would be if you've got excellent grades in quantitative subjects from a good school. Because basically, if we know that you've already, you've got that kind of track record in terms of your quantitative ability, getting you to sit GMAT really doesn't add any particular value. Therefore, we're quite happy to waive it. I think in addition to that kind of academic performance, if people have got a high quantitative content in their job, that becomes an additional justification for a waiver. Not on its own, but in addition to good grades. And similarly, having passed any of the levels of CFA will add a lot of weight. CFA on its own won't give you a waiver, but CFA plus good grades will. We keep going back to the point about CV review, but I would really encourage you to reach out to us, submit your CV online via our website, and if we agree that the programme is a good fit for you, then we can start a dialogue about, you know, are we definitely going to give you a waiver? Do we want to wait till we see an application? Do we want to wait until the admissions committee by making that decision? But we can give a very personalised feedback on that the minute we've seen your CV.
Perfect, thank you very much, Peter. On the next one, some people are asking for the GRE scores. Can we have a little bit more? I would say on GRE, I haven't got this quite, we've started to use GRE relatively recently. So we haven't got quite the same feel for what is a good score or not. But I would say people should be aiming above the 75 percentile in both the numeric and the verbal sections of GRE. And of course, you know, higher than that is always better. But just to stress, we have no preference between GMAT and GRE. And I think within the next couple of months, we'll probably give some much more precise figures on what we think will make a good GRE score. Thank you very much, Peter. That is very useful to know, actually. Do you require IELTS or TOEFL exam for international students?
Yeah. Okay, that's one thing I didn't cover at all in the presentation, actually. We're obviously looking for a high degree of fluency in English, probably rather higher than is the norm for UK universities or US universities, precisely because the experience is very collaborative. You're expected to talk up in the class a lot. When you're working with your study group, you really need to be very, very comfortable with English. We measure your English ability in a number of ways. So if you've studied or worked in an English-speaking environment, that's very significant for us. Similarly, both GMAT and GRE are measures of your English ability. When we call you for interview, the interview will always, at least 50% of it will be conducted in English. And obviously our alumni can give us very good feedback on that. And all the way through the application process, we're interacting with the candidates. So we're getting a judgment on their English ability. Generally, non-native English speakers should plan to sit TOEFL or IELTS unless they've done a significant part of their previous studies in English, or they've worked for a couple of years in an English-speaking environment, or lived in an English-speaking country. So again, it's one of those things where there's not necessarily entirely hard and fast rules about. But again, if people have submitted their CV for review, then we can similarly have a dialogue about whether we think an English test is going to be required or not. The one point on this is people get very confused about the visa requirements because there's a lot of noise out there saying what tests are and aren't acceptable to apply for a UK visa. And just so you know, there is no requirement for an English language test as part of the visa process, because as a top school, we're allowed to do our own evaluation of people's English ability. Therefore, TOEFL and IELTS aren't required for visas.
Perfect. I will only add on this one that do remember that you are assessed throughout your communications with us. It's not just through your application. So when you communicate with us by emails or by telephone, you're still being assessed about all this stuff.
That's a very transparent piece of advice, I agree.
It is. The next question is, how will I know that I'm the right fit for the LBS community? Which is very interesting, actually.
I would say really interact with our students and our alumni. And if they're the kind of people you want to kind of interact with, you see as great people who you'd like to have in your network, people who might potentially be important business contacts and friends, then you're probably a very good fit for the LBS community. Is that fair? I can't think of any other way of answering that.
It is. Again, stay in touch, do talk to us, do communicate with us. We're very open. And we are part of the community as well, staff members. So just being part of a webinar, coming along an event, you're talking to the community anyway. Does 3 to 8 years of work experience only apply for relevant finance or investment industry experience?
What we're doing is we measure your work experience from the point at which you complete your undergraduate studies to the August of the intake you're joining. So, maybe you did a couple of years in another field before shifting towards finance. We need to add that into the equation for calculating your work experience, because that's what recruiters will be doing. So really, that observation about sort of 3 to 7 years for full-time study for people who are self-financed isn't so much about what we think a perfect student is. It's really much more about who recruiters are looking for. And obviously we want successful graduates who are going to be snapped up by top financial institutions. So part of that is assuring people have the right kind of profile when they're joining the programme. Again, your team and my team are very happy to look at CVs, particularly if people are a bit unsure if they're at the upper end, whether it's still going to make sense or not. And that's really what one of the things we're here to do, is precisely to give you that kind of feedback.
Perfect. The next question is mostly for the recruitment team, so I'll just answer it straight away. How can I get a one-to-one consultation? Again, get in touch with us at mif@london.edu and we can arrange a one-to-one consultation with you on campus. We can do phone chats if you're not living around, but do stay in touch. And I think that's the main.
Yes.
The main
this should
outcome
be
of
the
this
big
presentation.
takeaway. Yes, absolutely. Got a question about Brexit. I think we always get a question about Brexit at our webinars now. And I mean, there's not a huge amount I can say. We've noticed very little impact so far in terms of application volumes or in employment outcomes on graduation. Now, of course, at the moment, we're just in this massive period of uncertainty. So it's hard to say more until we have a lot of sense of what the final deal is going to look like. I mean, I think that being said, always remember that quite a large proportion of our graduating students will work outside the UK anyway, and that will always have been their aspiration. And if you end up needing a visa to study in the UK, financial institutions are very used to supporting that. And London as a financial centre is entirely dependent on international skills. London as a financial centre wouldn't be sustainable if it was only staffed by UK citizens. And I think, however this ultimately turns out, I think, the school is very agile. We've been through, we have a 50-year history. We've been through many financial cycles, plenty of boom and bust, and always we managed to adjust to that very adeptly. And scary as Brexit may be, I think ultimately we will find the impact is completely controllable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much for covering that. I think that's a concern for everyone. And
yes, including us.
Yes, including us. But yeah, that's the last question for today. As we're running out of time.
Let me just put the contact details up again. So, as Christopher says, you can reach out to us. Certainly, there's a huge amount of information on our website, but also anything we didn't cover today, anything that comes up along the way, just reach out to us at mif@london.edu, and Christopher and her team and me and my team, very happy to work with you one-to-one along the way.
Great. Yes. So, last thing, any last tips on the admissions requirements, on the essays maybe?
I think really is just stressing that point again, of spend plenty of time doing research and plenty of time in self-reflection, because that will make writing the essays a breeze and filling in the application form. Great. And it's the best possible preparation for interview as well.
Great. We try to cover